Picture this. You're standing on a wooden ship in the middle of the North Atlantic. It's the year 1000 CE. The sky is iron gray. The wind feels like knives against your skin. Waves rise higher than buildings and slam into the hull with a force that rattles your bones. Your beard is frozen solid. Ice clings to the ropes. Every breath you take turns to crystals in the air before it disappears. There is no cabin, no shelter, no heater, no protection. And here's the part that doesn't make sense. You're not allowed to light a fire. Not because you forgot, not because you don't know how, not because you lack the technology. You choose not to. That decision, refusing warmth in one of the coldest places on Earth, might be the single most important reason Vikings dominated the seas. Because what looks like madness was actually engineering. And once you understand it, you'll never look at Viking ships the same way again. Let's start with what archaeologists actually found. In the waters of Roskilde Fjord in Denmark, researchers uncovered 5 Viking ships deliberately sunk nearly 1,000 years ago. These weren't scraps of wood. They were remarkably preserved warships and cargo vessels. They found tool chests, water barrels, repair kits, personal belongings, even food storage containers. But they didn't find a single heating device. No brazier, no hearth, no cooking pit, no charcoal residue, nothing. And this wasn't a fluke. The Oseberg ship, no heating system. The Gokstad ship, no heating system. Every major excavation, same story. It's not that Vikings didn't understand fire. On land, they built massive longhouses with advanced ventilation systems and large central hearths. They engineered airflow. They optimized heat distribution. They knew exactly how to control flames safely. But at sea, they eliminated it completely. Now, here's where most people get it wrong. They imagine Vikings as reckless warriors who just toughed it out, as if brute strength alone conquered freezing oceans. That's Hollywood. The real story is much more strategic. To understand why fire was forbidden, you have to understand the ships themselves. Viking ships were masterpieces of something called clinker construction. Each wooden plank overlapped the one below it, sealed tightly with tar and animal fibers. The rigging was coated in pine pitch. The sails were made of dense wool treated with animal fat to repel water. Translation: a Viking ship wasn't just wood, it was a floating torch. Every surface was flammable, every rope could ignite, every sail could become an inferno in seconds. And there was no separation between spaces, no compartments, no fireproof walls, just one long, open structure. Modern maritime engineers have calculated that if a fire started aboard a Viking longship, it could engulf the entire vessel in under 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Imagine you're hundreds of miles from shore. The temperature of the water is near freezing. If you jump overboard, hypothermia sets in within minutes. You can't extinguish the fire. You can't escape into the ocean. You can't outrun the flames. So Vikings made a calculation. Comfort versus survival. Warm hands or a floating coffin? They chose survival. That's the first layer of the story. But it raises an even more uncomfortable question. If you can't build a fire, how do you not freeze to death? This is where Viking intelligence becomes obvious. They didn't rely on one trick. They built an entire system. First, clothing. Modern people think medieval clothing was primitive, rough wool, heavy fur, crude stitching. But archaeological finds from Greenland tell a different story. Viking wool wasn't random, it was engineered. They used multiple grades of wool depending on purpose, some tightly woven to block wind, some looser to trap insulating air, some designed specifically to manage moisture. And here's the detail that blows modern assumptions apart. Wool insulates even when wet. Most modern fabrics lose heat instantly when soaked. Viking wool didn't. It kept insulating. That's not an accident. That's material science. And they didn't just throw on cloaks and hope for the best. They layered strategically. Inner layer to manage moisture, middle layer to trap warmth, outer layer to block wind and spray. But they went even further. Each morning before sailing, crew members performed what historians call sleeve sealing. Using bone needles and waxed thread, they stitched the cuffs of their sleeves shut at the wrist, tightly. Not decorative stitching, not symbolic, functional sealing. Why? Because the wrists are major heat loss points. Air enters through open sleeves and circulates cold directly across the body. By sealing the cuffs, they created a microclimate around their torso. When they needed mobility during combat or landing, they sliced themselves free with small knives. They turned clothing into adjustable survival equipment. Think about that. This wasn't brute endurance, it was design thinking, and clothing was only the beginning. The real genius shows up when the sun sets, because no matter how well you dress, eventually you have to stop moving. You have to sleep. And sleep is when hypothermia becomes deadly. Hollywood shows Vikings wrapped in individual furs, lying apart like solitary warriors. That's fiction. In reality, they used communal sleeping systems. Two-person sleeping bags made of sheepskin, fur on the inside, waterproof exterior. Why two? Physics. Two human bodies generate compound heat. In an enclosed, insulated space, shared body warmth increases internal temperature dramatically compared to one person alone. Researchers estimate that paired sleepers could maintain temperatures 15 to 20 degrees warmer than outside air using only metabolic heat. But they went even further. Crews were assigned sleeping partners based on watch schedules. When one sailor was on duty, his partner slept in the bag, warming it. When shifts switched, the second sailor entered an already warm space. The bag never cooled completely. Heat was preserved in rotation. That's not luck, that's logistics. Even the ship design contributed. They slept elevated between rowing benches above the coldest air that pooled in the bilge. When sails were lowered, they functioned as windbreaks, trapping warmth from dozens of bodies beneath them. It became a collective heat dome. Even wealthy Vikings used the same system. Rank didn't matter at sea. Survival erased hierarchy. Now, here's the problem nobody talks about. Heat requires fuel, not firewood, calories. Maintaining body temperature in freezing wind burns enormous energy. Without enough food, even perfect clothing fails. But you can't cook. No fire allowed. So Vikings solved that too. Every meal was prepared before departure. Dried fish that lasted months, hard grain biscuits reinforced with nuts and seeds, fermented dairy products, and perhaps most ingenious, cold porridge. Before sailing, cooks prepared massive quantities of grain mixed with butter and salt. It thickened into a dense paste that resisted spoilage. At sea, sailors ate it directly or mixed it with cold water. It wasn't glamorous, but it delivered 2,000 to 3,000 calories per day, exactly what was needed to sustain body heat. They treated nutrition as insulation. And then there's something even more strategic. Vikings weren't endlessly exposed to open ocean. Recent surveys have identified hundreds of harbor sites stretching from Norway to Newfoundland. They built seasonal bases, winter camps, repair stations. Places like Torksey in England reveal enormous temporary settlements with hards, workshops, and supply chains. They heated on land. They maintained ships on land. They cooked on land. The ship was mobility. The shore was infrastructure. And here's the twist most people miss. While Mediterranean cultures experimented with onboard heating systems, Viking ships remained lighter and faster. No braziers, no heavy iron stoves, no bulky fuel stores. Less weight meant more speed. More speed meant surprise attacks. More speed meant escape routes. More speed meant survival. Their refusal to carry fire wasn't just about safety, it was about dominance. And when modern archaeologists tested a full-scale reconstruction in the North Sea without heating, it worked. Crews survived using only authentic materials and techniques. Core temperatures stayed safe, morale remained stable. Which brings us to something even more fascinating, the psychological layer. Excavations of Viking camps reveal hundreds of gaming pieces, carved boards, dice, and entertainment objects. They invested in morale, because mental state influences physical endurance. Storytelling, competition, social bonding, these weren't distractions, they were survival tools. Vikings understood something modern science now confirms. Belief, cohesion, and shared identity increase tolerance to cold stress. They engineered mindset. So when you imagine Vikings freezing miserably in the dark, imagine something else instead. Dozens of sailors pressed together beneath a lowered sail, wool layers sealed tight, stomachs full of preserved calories, laughing over carved game pieces, waiting for their watch shift. Cold? Yes. Reckless? No. Everything was calculated. Everything was optimized. They didn't eliminate fire because they were primitive. They eliminated it because they were strategic. But here's the part that changes everything. Rejecting fire wasn't just a shipboard policy. It reshaped their entire society. It forced cooperation. It eliminated luxury at sea. It prioritized collective survival over individual comfort. And that mindset carried into everything they did, into their raids, into their trade networks, into their expansion across the North Atlantic. They reached North America 5 centuries before Columbus. They built trade routes from Greenland to Constantinople, all in open ships, all without onboard heat. The decision to freeze rather than burn transformed them from coastal sailors into maritime engineers. But there's still something deeper beneath this story. Because surviving cold water voyages wasn't just about clothing, food, or sleeping systems. It required something even more radical. Something most modern people would struggle to accept. By now, you understand something most people don't. Vikings didn't survive the freezing North Atlantic because they were superhuman. They survived because they engineered a system that replaced fire entirely. But there's a final layer to this story that most documentaries never mention, and it might be the most powerful part of all. Because staying alive in brutal cold isn't just a physical challenge, it's psychological. Long before modern science studied cold exposure, long before researchers coined terms like cold adaptation or stress conditioning, Vikings were already practicing it, intentionally. They didn't suddenly become cold resistant the moment they stepped onto a ship. Cold tolerance was built on land, from childhood. In Scandinavia, winter wasn't an event, it was a season that dominated half the year. Children grew up outdoors, farming, herding, repairing tools, gathering firewood, all in freezing temperatures. Exposure wasn't rare, it was routine. Your body adapts to what it experiences consistently. Modern research confirms this. Repeated cold exposure improves circulation efficiency, increases brown fat activation, and enhances metabolic heat production. Vikings didn't have those scientific terms, but they had results. Cold wasn't an enemy, it was training. Now imagine stepping onto a ship after years of natural conditioning. The shock isn't as extreme. The discomfort is familiar. That familiarity alone changes your survival odds dramatically. But adaptation wasn't just physical, it was social. Remember the communal sleeping system? That wasn't just about shared warmth, it was about eliminating isolation. Cold amplifies loneliness. Loneliness magnifies discomfort. When humans feel alone in harsh conditions, their stress hormones spike. Stress accelerates heat loss and drains energy. Vikings countered that by making isolation almost impossible at sea. You slept next to someone, you rode beside someone, you stood watch while someone waited to relieve you. Constant connection. This created what psychologists now call collective resilience, and the archaeological evidence supports it. Excavations across Scandinavia have uncovered more than 300 gaming pieces in Viking campsites. Board games weren't rare luxury items, they were common. Think about that. When cargo space was precious, when every extra pound slowed a ship down, they still brought games. That wasn't random. Games kept the mind engaged. They created competition. They distracted from discomfort. They maintained morale during long, brutal stretches of ocean. Morale isn't soft. Morale is survival. There's even evidence that storytelling played a strategic role. The sagas weren't just entertainment. They reinforced identity. They reminded crews who they were: descendants of warriors, explorers, survivors. Identity influences endurance. If you believe you are someone who survives the cold, you endure longer than someone who believes they are a victim of it. That belief alone changes outcomes. But let's go even deeper. Vikings didn't sail blindly into winter storms. There's a common image of long ships battling endless snow and ice year-round. It's dramatic and mostly wrong. Voyages were carefully timed. Navigation wasn't reckless, it was seasonal. They understood wind patterns, daylight hours, ocean currents. Sailing windows were selected for survivability, not heroics. Winter sailing did happen, but extended expeditions were often planned around safer months. This wasn't about proving toughness, it was about minimizing unnecessary risk. Because here's the truth: Vikings weren't addicted to danger, they were addicted to efficiency. Every decision on board a ship had to serve speed, safety, or strategic advantage. Fire served none of those. It slowed them down, it increased risk, it required fuel storage, it demanded containment infrastructure. So they eliminated it. But here's something fascinating. While Vikings refused fire at sea, Mediterranean cultures embraced it. Roman and Byzantine ships used bronze braziers and controlled cooking stations. They had enclosed sections where small flames could be managed. Why the difference? Ship design. Mediterranean vessels were heavier, broader, often compartmentalized. They traveled warmer waters. Their construction allowed partial containment of fire risk. Viking longships were different creatures entirely. Narrow hulls, flexible frames, designed for speed, beach landings, shallow rivers, built to move quickly between coasts. Adding heating infrastructure would have compromised their core advantage: speed. And speed was everything. Speed meant striking before defenses were ready. Speed meant retreating before retaliation. Speed meant outrunning storms. It's easy to romanticize Vikings as fearless berserkers who didn't care about comfort. But the more you examine the evidence, the clearer it becomes. They weren't fearless. They were calculating. Even their shore infrastructure reveals this mindset. Recent coastal surveys have identified more than 200 Viking harbor sites stretching from Norway to Newfoundland. These weren't random anchor points. They were strategic hubs, supply depots, repair yards, seasonal settlements. Places like Torksey in England show massive winter camps spanning over 50 hectares. Proper hearths, workshops, living quarters. This was the real heating system, not on the ship, but waiting at the destination. Ships were designed for movement. Land bases were designed for comfort and long-term survival. It's a division of function that modern logistics experts would recognize instantly. Mobility platform versus infrastructure base. That separation allowed Viking fleets to travel light and strike hard, knowing warmth and repair awaited them ashore. And here's the part that might surprise you most. Modern reconstructions have tested this system. In 2007, a full-scale replica of a Viking ship sailed from Denmark to Ireland using only historical methods. No hidden heaters, no modern fabrics, no technological shortcuts. The crew used layered wool clothing, communal sleeping, preserved food, rotational watch systems. They survived. Core temperatures stayed stable. The ship remained functional. No catastrophic hypothermia. It worked. Not because the sailors were superhuman, but because the system was. And systems are powerful. But there's still one final element. Ships were designed for movement. Land bases were designed for comfort and long-term survival. It's a division of function that modern logistics experts would recognize instantly. Mobility platform versus infrastructure base. That separation allowed Viking fleets to travel light and strike hard, knowing warmth and repair awaited them ashore. And here's the part that might surprise you most. Modern reconstructions have tested this system. In 2007, a full-scale replica of a Viking ship sailed from Denmark to Ireland using only historical methods. No hidden heaters, no modern fabrics, no technological shortcuts. The crew used layered wool clothing, communal sleeping, preserved food, rotational watch systems. They survived. Core temperatures stayed stable. The ship remained functional. No catastrophic hypothermia. It worked. Not because the sailors were superhuman, but because the system was. And systems are powerful. But there's still one final element most people overlook: discipline. Choosing not to light a fire isn't easy when your hands are numb, when your teeth are chattering, when the wind feels like it's stripping heat from your bones. Discipline means resisting the immediate comfort of warmth in favor of long-term survival. That's a cultural trait. It requires shared agreement, shared rules, shared consequences. One reckless crew member could doom everyone by lighting a flame, so the refusal had to be collective. This tells us something profound about Viking society at sea. Hierarchy existed, but cooperation overruled ego. Wealth didn't buy special treatment on a freezing deck. Leaders slept in the same system, ate the same preserved food, endured the same cold. That equality under harsh conditions forged loyalty, and loyalty translates into military effectiveness. When your survival depends on the person next to you, bonds strengthen quickly. Now, think about the long-term effect of this mindset. A culture that prioritizes strategic thinking over comfort. A society that values system design over brute force. A maritime force that chooses calculated risk over dramatic display. That's not chaos. That's engineering. And engineering wins wars. It's no coincidence that Vikings reached North America centuries before Columbus. Nor is it coincidence that they established trade routes stretching from Greenland to Constantinople. Their dominance wasn't fueled by fire. It was fueled by planning. Every aspect of shipboard life was intentional. Clothing optimized for wet insulation. Sleeping systems designed for compound heat. Food engineered for cold endurance. Harbor networks positioned for seasonal relief. Psychological tools to maintain morale. Strict discipline to eliminate catastrophic risk. Fire simply didn't fit the equation. And here's the broader lesson. Comfort is often the enemy of capability. By refusing onboard heating, Vikings removed a vulnerability. They sacrificed short-term warmth to preserve long-term mobility and safety. In modern terms, they minimized single points of failure. If their warmth depended on flame, flame could destroy them. So they designed a model where warmth depended on people, on cooperation, on preparation, on biology and behavior rather than combustion. It's a radical shift in thinking, and it reshapes how we view them. They weren't just raiders with axes. They were maritime strategists who understood risk management at a level many civilizations didn't. So the next time you imagine a Viking longship cutting through icy waves, don't picture reckless warriors shivering miserably. Picture engineers. Picture planners. Picture a crew that deliberately rejected fire because they understood something simple and terrifying. The ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. 4 minutes of flame could erase years of preparation. So they chose cold. They chose discipline. They chose strategy. And in doing so, they became unstoppable. Because the real secret wasn't surviving without fire. It was redesigning their entire approach to survival. They didn't just endure the freezing seas, they mastered them. And that mastery changed history.